Hello, and welcome to the 67th episode of Scripture in a Year series hosted by Saints Peter and Paul Orthodox Church in the Albanian Archdiocese of the OCA. Today's reading is from the first book of Kings, or 1 Samuel, chapters 29 to 31. All the encampments of the Philistines gathered at Aphek, and the Israelites encamped in Endor at Jezreel. And the captains of the Philistines passed in review by hundreds and by thousands. David and his men passed in review at the rear with Achish. Then the captains of the Philistines said, "Who are these passing by in review?" And Achish said to the commanders of the Philistines, "Is this not David, the servant of Saul, king of Israel, the one who has been with us daily for the last 2 years? I have found no fault in him from the day he defected to me until today." But the commanders of the Philistines were grieved because of him. So they said to him, "Return the man to the place you appointed for him. Do not let him go with us to battle, for fear that he will become our adversary in the battle. For what better way could he have to reconcile himself to his Lord, if not with the heads of these men? Is this not David, about whom they sang in the dances, saying, 'Saul slew his thousands, and David his 10,000s?'" Then Achish called David and said to him, "Surely as the Lord lives, you have been upright with me in the camp and good in my sight, in both your going out and your coming in. To this very day I have found no evil in you since the day of your coming to me. Nevertheless, you are not favored in the sight of the lords of the Philistines. Therefore return now and go in peace. Thus you shall not do evil in the sight of the lords of the Philistines." So David said to Achish, "But what have I done to you? And from the day I came up to you to this day, what in your servant have you found that I may not fight against the enemies of my lord the king?" Then Achish answered to David, "I know that you are good in my sight. Nevertheless, the commanders of the Philistines said, 'He shall not go up with us to the battle.' Now rise up early in the morning, you and your servants who came with you, and go to the place I established for you. Do not keep an evil thought in your heart, because you are good in my sight. And rise early in the morning and depart at first light." So David arose early, he and his men, to depart and to guard the land of the Philistines. The Philistines went up to battle at Jezreel. Now before David and his men entered Ziklag on the 3rd day, Amalek had entered and attacked Ziklag and burned it with fire. They did not kill the women, and all who were there, from small to great, were carried away captive as they went on their way. So David and his men came to the city, and it was burned with fire. Their wives, their sons, and their daughters were taken captive. Then David and the people with him lifted up their voices and wept until they were too tired to weep any more. And both David's wives, Ahinoam the Jezreelite woman, and Abigail the widow of Nabal the Carmelite, were taken captive. Now David was greatly distressed, because the people spoke of stoning him, for the life of every person was grieved, each for his sons and for his daughters. But David became strong in the Lord his God. And David said to Abiathar the priest, Ahimelech's son, "Bring the ephod." So David inquired of the Lord, saying, "Surely I shall pursue after this troop. But what if I overcome them?" And the Lord answered him, "Pursue them, for in overtaking them you shall surely apprehend the troop, delivering the captives." So David went, he and the 600 men with him, and they came to the brook Besor. The rest of his men stayed behind. David pursued them with 400 men. 200 men stayed behind, staying on the other side of the brook Besor. They then found an Egyptian man in the field and brought him to David. They gave him bread and he ate, and they let him drink water. They also gave him a piece of fig cake. After eating, his strength came back to him, for he was without bread or water for 3 days and 3 nights. Then David said to him, "To whom do you belong, and where are you from?" The young Egyptian man said, "I am the servant of an Amalekite, and my master left me behind because I fell sick 3 days ago. We invaded the south of the Colthi in the region of Judah and the south area of Caleb. We burned Ziklag with fire." And David said to him, "Can you take me down to this troop?" So the young servant said, "By God, first swear to me that you will neither kill me nor deliver me into the hand of my master, and then I will take you down to this troop." And when he brought him there, they were there spread all over the land, eating and drinking and celebrating, because of all the great plunder taken from the land of the Philistines and from the land of Judah. Then from the morning star until the evening of the next day, David came upon them and attacked them. Not a man of them was saved, except 400 young men who got on camels and fled. So David recovered everything the Amalekites took, and David rescued his 2 wives, and nothing of theirs was lacking, either small or great, or sons or daughters, or plunder, or anything taken from them. David recovered it all, and David took all the flocks and herds, and put them ahead of the plunder. Concerning the plunder, it was said, "This is David's plunder." Now David returned to the 200 men, the ones too weary to follow after David, whom he made stay there at the brook Besor. Upon his return they went out to meet David, and to meet the people with him. And when David came near the people, he greeted them in peace. But all the ill-disposed and the worthless men who had gone and fought with David said in response, "They did not go with us, and so they will not receive any of the plunder we recovered, except let each one lead away with him his wife and his children, and let them return." But David said, "My brethren, this you shall not do with what the Lord has given us, who preserved us and delivered into our hand the troop that came against us. And who will heed your words? For they are not inferior to you. Instead, they shall share alike, each according to the portion of him who went down to the battle, as being the same portion of him who stayed behind with the supplies." So it was, from that day forward, it became an ordinance and a statute in Israel to this day. Now when David came to Ziklag, he sent some of the plunder to the elders of Judah and to his friends, saying, "Behold, from the plunder of the enemies of the Lord, to those who were in Bethshur, to those who were in Ramah of the south, to those who were in Jatir, to those who were in Aroer, to those who were in Amadi, to those who were in Siphmoth, to those who were in Eshtemoa, to those who were in Gath and in Kinnon, and to those in Saphak, and to those in Timath, to those who were in Carmel, to those who were in the cities of the Jerahmeelites, to those who were in the cities of the Kenites, to those who were in Jeremoth, to those who were in Beersheba, to those who were in Nu, to those who were in Hebron, and to all the places where David himself and his men were accustomed to pass through. Now the Philistines fought against Israel, and the men of Israel fled from before the Philistines. They fell slain on Mount Gilboa. Then the Philistines followed hard after Saul and his sons. And the Philistines killed Jonathan, Abinadab, and Malchishua, the sons of Saul. The battle weighed heavily against Saul. The javelin throwers and the archers hit him, and he was wounded in the belly. Then Saul said to his armor-bearer, "Draw your sword and thrust me through with it. Do not let these uncircumcised men come and thrust me through and abuse me." But his armor-bearer would not do it, for he was greatly afraid. Therefore Saul took a sword and fell on it. And when his armor-bearer saw that Saul was dead, he fell on his sword and died with him. So Saul, his 3 sons, and his armor-bearer died together that same day. And when the men of Israel, those on the other side of the valley and those on the other side of the Jordan, saw that the men of Israel had fled, and that Saul and his sons were dead, they forsook the cities and fled. The Philistines came and settled in them. So the next day, when the Philistines came to strip the slain, they found Saul and his 3 sons fallen on Mount Gilboa. And they turned him over and stripped off his armor. They then sent them and his armor into the land of the Philistines, proclaiming the good news to their idols and to the people. Then they placed his armor in the temple of the Ashtaroths, and fastened his body onto the wall of Bethshan. And the inhabitants of Jabesh-Gilead heard what the Philistines did to Saul. And all the valiant men arose and traveled all night in order to remove the body of Saul and the body of Jonathan his son from the wall at Bethshan. They carried them to Jabesh and buried them there. Then they took their bones and buried them under the field at Jabesh, and fasted for 7 days. Here ends the reading for today.